She was 9 months pregnant, tied up by the ankles, and surrounded by flying spears. Moments later, she and her unborn baby were gone, wiped out, in what might be the first war crime in human history. Forget battles with swords. Forget shields clashing in glory. The truth about ancient warfare is darker than anything you've been told. No dramatic music, no noble speeches, just cold precision, shattered skulls, and entire tribes disappearing like smoke. We're about to unravel a story that flips everything you thought you knew about early humans. Were our ancestors peaceful gatherers just trying to survive, or blood-soaked tacticians with a kill list? Today, we're following the trail of ancient bones and brutal tactics to uncover what humans were really like long before empires and flags. No bronze, no iron, just wood, stone, and raw instinct deciding which lineages would make it to today and which would be wiped out without a trace. Our story opens not in Africa, but deep beneath the earth in a Spanish cave. Here, 400,000 years ago, long before Homo sapiens even showed up, someone's head was split open in a way that suggested more than just an accident. What archaeologists found was a skull, named Skull 36 from the pit of bones, and it had 2 distinct, deliberate fractures. Same weapon, 2 hits, 1 target. This wasn't an animal attack or a stumble into a ravine, it was a face-to-face execution. The first known murder in human-like history. But murder wasn't the question that kept scientists up at night. What they really wanted to know was this: when did we stop killing individuals and start killing entire groups? The answer came not from Europe, but from the cracked, sun-baked edges of a Kenyan lakebed. In 2012, scientists digging near Lake Nokari stumbled on something that sent a shiver down the archaeological community's spine. It wasn't just bones. It was 27 dead people scattered across the dirt like dominoes mid-fall, all showing signs of a massacre. This wasn't just another excavation. It was a 10,000-year-old crime scene. Dr. Elena Marquez, a forensic anthropologist from Oxford, was the lead on the dig. What she found blew a hole in the idea that early humans were all peace pipes and berries. In the journal Origins, she wrote that these remains proved prehistoric tribes were not only capable of war, they were organized about it. These weren't warriors. This was a tiny camp of foragers. No burial mounds, no signs of ceremony. Just death quick, brutal, and thorough. And what made this even more unsettling wasn't just how they died, but who they were. 8 women, 6 kids, some barely out of infancy. Of the 27 victims, 12 had full skeletons, and 10 of those showed horrifying injuries. Crushed cheekbones, caved-in skulls, broken ribs and shattered hands. One man had an obsidian arrowhead still jammed into his chest. And then there were the bound 4 people, including one pregnant woman, likely only weeks from giving birth, had their wrists tied behind their backs before they were killed. This wasn't a raid. This was extermination. Professor Adrian Blackwell, also part of the research team, summed it up bluntly. Humans are wired to love and protect, but we're also wired to destroy. Evolution didn't pick a side, it picked both. This one discovery pushed archaeology into a new era. It forced experts to confront an ugly truth. Warfare isn't something we invented after we built cities. It's something we've carried in us all along. Most people assume warfare started when humans settled down, built farms, and began fighting over land. But here's the twist: this massacre didn't happen in some dried-up desert. 10,000 years ago, that same land was a lush, thriving paradise. The lakeside was bursting with catfish, antelope, and enough edible plants to feed an entire community without conflict. These weren't starving people fighting over scraps. They had everything, which made the violence even more unsettling. Whoever carried out the attack came prepared. They didn't bring fishing spears or hunting knives. They brought clubs, lots of them. Big ones, small ones, sizes that suggested a coordinated plan, not a chaotic ambush. And the obsidian blades? That wasn't local stone. These attackers had traveled not to trade, but to kill. Dr. Elena Marquez, who who led the original excavation, noted how systematic the violence appeared. The range of weapon types pointed to teamwork, like a prehistoric hit squad. But despite the evidence, not everyone bought the massacre theory. In the same scientific journal, a group led by anthropologist Dr. Stefan Kraskowski fired back. They questioned everything from the trauma patterns to the positioning of the bodies. According to them, the injuries could have happened after death. Shifting soil, scavenging animals, even the weight of time itself, all could leave marks that looked like violence. Kraskowski's team highlighted that many of the skeletons were still intact, not scattered like you'd expect from a violent raid. Their arrangement, they claimed, looked more like the result of natural decay than battlefield chaos. The critics didn't deny the trauma, they just weren't sure it was murder. This clash of interpretations highlights the deeper challenge with ancient history. We're not just piecing together old bones, we're trying to read motives in the dirt. And sometimes, the difference between war and freak accident hangs on microscopic scratches and fossilized ribs. But there's one thing no one disputes. Early humans had weapons, and they were clever about how they used them. And that brings us to a breakthrough that rewrote everything we knew about prehistoric tech. While Neanderthals were still lunging at animals with massive hand spears, early modern humans had developed something much more dangerous distance: the bow and arrow. And it turns out, we've been shooting from afar a lot longer than we thought. In a cave at Grotte Mandrin in southern France, researchers stumbled on something game-changing: a collection of nearly 1,500 minuscule stone tips, many no larger than a paperclip. Dr. Isabel Drexler led the study and discovered that these tiny arrowheads, dating back 54,000 years, were unmistakably used in archery. The evidence? Their size. These tips were so light, some just a few grams, that using them with anything other than a bow was basically impossible. They were too small to throw, too fragile to thrust. They were built to fly. And here's why that matters in the grand story of ancient warfare. While Neanderthals had to get up close, risking injury every time they hunted, early Homo sapiens could take down targets from meters away. That wasn't just safer, it was strategic. As reported in Science Focus, this tech edge gave modern humans a massive upper hand as they spread into Europe. Armed with spear throwers and bows, they didn't just survive, they outmaneuvered. Their weapons didn't just kill, they changed how humans hunted and how they fought. Now picture this. A Neanderthal has to get close, really close, to take down a wild mammoth. One mistake, and they're either trampled or gored. Meanwhile, early Homo sapiens, they could strike from a distance, silent and lethal. That difference wasn't just tactical, it was evolutionary. Dr. Drexler broke it down simply. Bows and arrows didn't just extend your reach, they changed the game. Easier to carry, no need for brute strength, and incredibly versatile. You could hunt, fish, or if needed, take out an enemy before they ever saw you coming. This wasn't just about efficiency. It was about who would survive and who would fade into extinction. And that leads us to one of the most debated mysteries in prehistory. Why did Neanderthals vanish while Homo sapiens thrived? Archaeological records paint a stark picture. Neanderthals stuck with what they knew: heavy, handheld weapons for 150,000 years. No big breakthroughs, just more stabbing and more bruises. In contrast, modern humans were constantly tinkering. They invented adhesives made from red ochre, tree sap, and beeswax to fasten tiny stone points onto shafts, precision tools engineered for speed and impact. The Grotte Mandrin findings drove the point home. Neanderthals and modern humans lived side by side, but only one group developed ranged weapons. The others just kept thrusting giant spears. The injuries tell the story. Neanderthal remains are riddled with blunt force trauma to the skull, ribs, and especially the forearms. Those are classic defense wounds, consistent with close quarters combat or getting smacked by an antelope hoof. In contrast, modern human skeletons show far fewer injuries from hand-to-hand fighting. Why? Because they weren't fighting up close. Dr. Drexler didn't sugarcoat it. From a battlefield perspective, bows meant you could kill before the other side got within reach. which meant fewer injuries for you and more casualties for them. And as humanity stepped into the Neolithic age, the signs of conflict didn't disappear, they evolved. Take the Talheim death pit in Germany. Dated to around 5,500 BCE, it contained the remains of 34 people, all dumped in a single mass grave. But here's what caught researchers off guard. There were no local women among the dead, only immigrant women. That detail flipped the assumptions. This wasn't a clash over crops or water. It might have been a raid to capture women, power, mating rights, tribal dominance, all mixed into a violent cocktail. Warfare wasn't just about land anymore. It was about social control. And the story got even stranger in South America. In the highlands of Peru, at a site called Curimarca, archaeologists unearthed skeletons with clear trauma but not from war. These injuries had healed. Some skulls had dents, broken ribs had refused. This wasn't death in battle. It was something else, maybe ritual fighting, a violent rite of passage, or ceremonial combat. That distinction matters. Prehistoric violence wasn't always about death. Sometimes it was symbolic, sometimes it was personal, sometimes it was politics. But when things got serious, early humans knew how to lock down. The clearest sign? The fortresses. And here's the wild part. The oldest known fort in the world wasn't built by farmers. It wasn't even built in a city. It was built in the Siberian wilderness by hunter-gatherers over 8,000 years ago. Researchers identified the site as the Amya Fort, and it didn't look primitive. This was a structured, fortified community, complete with 20 sunken pit houses, surrounded by earthen walls and wooden barricades. These weren't just tents in the woods. This was a fortress built to keep others out. This discovery flips a long-standing assumption on its head that defensive fortresses only came with farming. Turns out, even hunter-gatherers with no crops to protect had the coordination, manpower, and motivation to build real strongholds. In Europe, the surprises kept coming. Archaeologists recently uncovered 15 newly identified fortified settlements across northern Poland from the Neolithic and early Bronze Age. Some of them stretched over 20 hectares, complete with ramparts and timber defenses that wouldn't look out of place next to medieval castles. That tells us something fundamental. The fear of attack wasn't a rare emergency, it was part of everyday life. These societies didn't just prepare for war, they expected it. So what did prehistoric battles actually look like? The answer is uglier and more chaotic than any scene in a movie. There were no duels, no last stands, just short, vicious clashes where the outcome could be decided in seconds, and they didn't spare the weak. Women, children, and elders were often caught in the crossfire. The weapons weren't crude. They were smart and deadly. These conflicts were driven by a messy mix of motives: food, land, social pressure, fear, and power. Archaeological findings suggest that organized violence goes back as far as our ability to share a campfire, maybe even further. Sites like Massacre show us that 10,000 years ago, small bands of humans were already launching strategic, pre-planned attacks on rival groups, but violence wasn't the only thing that left a mark. The tools themselves tell a story of ingenuity. Bows and arrows weren't just inventions, they were engineering achievements. Building a working bow requires understanding wood flexibility, string tension, and projectile dynamics. These early humans weren't grunting cavemen, they were skilled technicians. In fact, what we find carved into the earth from weapons to graves tells us something deeper. Humans have always held the potential for both cooperation and destruction, sometimes side by side, sometimes within the same moment. Learning about this doesn't mean excusing it. It means recognizing the full range of what we're capable of. Because here's the twist. Despite all the bones, all the wounds, all the forts, violence didn't win. Cooperation did. The groups that survived the long game weren't always the most vicious. They were the ones who could adapt, invent, share knowledge, work together, solve problems without always picking up a weapon. So the real takeaway from our bloody ancient past isn't that violence is unavoidable. It's that choice has always been in our hands between war and peace, between isolation and community, between breaking things and building something new. Even back then, our ancestors had both instincts inside them. And we still do. The question, now as then, is simple. Which one do we choose?